Jake lived alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. His life was simple. He worked during the day at a local hardware store, came home, ate dinner, and watched TV until he fell asleep. Nothing exciting ever happened in his life. But that changed one night. It started with a strange sound. Jake was lying in bed, half asleep, when he heard a soft rustling noise. It came from under his bed. At first, he thought it was just the wind outside. But then he heard it again. A quiet shuffle, like something moving. His eyes snapped open. Was it a rat? A stray cat that somehow got inside? The thought made his skin crawl. He didn't like the idea of anything living under his bed. Slowly, he sat up. The room was dark except for the dim glow of his bedside lamp. He reached for his phone and turned on the flashlight. Taking a deep breath, he bent down and peeked under the bed. His heart nearly stopped. Two glowing blue eyes stared back at him. Jake froze. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. A figure was curled up under his bed, barely fitting in the small space. The person, no, not a person, had smooth bluish skin and long silver hair that shimmered in the dim light. The eyes, bright like tiny stars, blinked at him. Jake did the only thing a normal person would do in such a situation. He jumped back and shouted, "What the?" The figure quickly crawled out from under the bed. Jake scrambled backward, hitting the nightstand. The lamp wobbled but didn't fall. His heart pounded as he pressed himself against the wall. Now in the open, the strange being stood up. She was tall, with a slender frame, wearing a tight-fitting silver outfit that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Her face was human-like, but there was something different. Her skin had a faint glow, and her ears were slightly pointed. She raised her hands in a calming gesture. "Do not be afraid," she said in a soft, musical voice. Jake's mind raced. He had to be dreaming. Or maybe he was hallucinating. Did he eat something weird for dinner? He pinched himself. No, this was real. "Who? What?" Jake stammered, his voice shaking. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head. "I am Mira," she said. "I am a researcher from the auxiliary species. I am here to study human behavior." Jake blinked. "You're an alien?" "Yes." She nodded as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Jake let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, sure. An alien. In my apartment. Under my bed. Makes perfect sense." Mira studied him with curiosity. "You are reacting as expected. Shock, confusion, mild fear. This is useful data." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Data? Wait a minute. You were spying on me." "I was observing." She folded her arms. "I needed a secure place to conduct my research without interference." Jake groaned and rubbed his face. "And you chose under my bed." "It was convenient," Mira said. "You live alone. You do not check under your bed. It was an ideal location." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "You've been here this whole time. How long?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Jake's jaw dropped. "You mean to tell me an alien has been living under my bed for 3 weeks, and I had no idea?" "Correct." Jake felt like he was going to pass out. He took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm himself. Okay. Why are you even here? What do you want?" Mira's glowing eyes studied him. "I am here to study human relationships, specifically human courtship and mating behaviors." Jake choked on air. "Excuse me." Mira continued as if she didn't notice his reaction. "My species lacks emotional depth. We reproduce through genetic selection, but we do not experience bonds like humans do. Our scientists wish to understand the emotional connections that humans form. It is a fascinating subject." Jake rubbed his temples. "So let me get this straight. You traveled across the stars, came to Earth, and decided to hide under my bed, to study dating." "Yes," Mira said simply. Jake let out a long sigh. This is insane. Mira tilted her head again. Your reaction is understandable. However, I assure you, I mean no harm. My research is purely observational. Observational. Jake's eyes narrowed. Then why were you under my bed? Mira hesitated for the first time. I may have made an error in my calculations. Jake crossed his arms. What kind of error? She looked slightly embarrassed. I assumed humans engaged in romantic interactions more frequently. I expected to observe various behaviors, but you have exhibited very few. Jake blinked. Then it hit him. You mean? He pointed at himself. You expected me to be dating someone, having romantic moments. Yes. Jake groaned. Well, sorry to disappoint, but my love life is non-existent. Mira frowned. This was not anticipated. Jake shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. You picked the worst person to spy on if you wanted romance. Mira considered this. Then perhaps you can assist me in another way. Jake narrowed his eyes. How? Mira straightened. If I cannot observe naturally, then I must learn directly. You will help me understand human relationships. Jake stared at her. You want me to teach you about dating? Yes. Jake let out a laugh, half in amusement, half in frustration. Oh, this just keeps getting better. Mira remained serious. Will you assist me? Jake sighed, rubbing his face. His life had been completely normal just an hour ago. Now he had an alien woman asking him to teach her about human romance. Finally, he looked at her and muttered, I can't believe I'm saying this, but fine. Mira smiled. Excellent. Let us begin. Jake groaned. He had a feeling his life was never going to be the same again. Jake sat on his bed, staring at Mira like she had just told him she was the queen of the universe. In a way, what she said was even crazier. An alien scientist had been secretly living under his bed for weeks, watching him, and now she wanted him to teach her about human dating. This had to be some kind of bizarre dream. Any second now, his alarm would go off, and he'd wake up in his normal, boring life. Mira, however, stood calmly in front of him, waiting for an answer. Her glowing blue eyes didn't blink much, which made her stare a little unsettling. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Okay, so let me get this straight. You're an alien. You came here to study human relationships because your species doesn't do romance. And you decided my apartment was the perfect place to do it. Mira nodded. That is correct. He rubbed his temples. And you really thought I was going to have some kind of exciting love life for you to study? Yes. My initial research indicated that human relationships are common. However, I did not account for individual differences. Jake let out a short laugh. Well, yeah. Not everyone is in a relationship all the time. Mira tilted her head slightly. Fascinating. The variability in human courtship patterns is more complex than I expected. Jake sighed. Look, I don't know what kind of movies or books you studied, but real-life dating isn't like that. People don't just fall in love instantly. There's a whole process, and sometimes people choose to stay single for a long time. Mira nodded thoughtfully. I see. Then my research must continue through direct study. That is why I require your assistance. Jake squinted at her. You seriously want me to teach you about dating? Yes, Mira said, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. Jake shook his head. That's ridiculous. I mean, first of all, you're not even human. How do you expect to learn about human relationships if you're not? He stopped, realizing something. Wait, are you even, biologically compatible with humans? Mira blinked. If you are asking whether my species and yours can reproduce, the answer is no. However, emotional connections are not necessarily dependent on physical compatibility. I am here to study human bonds, not biological reproduction. Jake raised an eyebrow. So you just want to understand emotions? Correct, Mira said. My species does not experience emotions as you do. We function logically. We make decisions based on efficiency, survival, and knowledge. But human relationships involve complex emotions: love, attachment, jealousy, heartbreak. These are foreign concepts to us. Our scientists believe that understanding them may help us evolve beyond pure logic. Jake leaned back, thinking. An alien species that didn't feel emotions. That sounded like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But Mira didn't seem like a robot. She showed curiosity. She wanted to learn. That had to count for something, right? Still, the idea of teaching an alien about dating felt completely insane. Jake sighed. Even if I agree to help, where would we even start? Mira's eyes brightened. I have studied many human films and texts regarding romance. However, I require real-world understanding. Perhaps we can begin by observing human interactions together. Jake frowned. You mean, like, people watching? Precisely. Jake sighed. I don't know. That feels kinda weird. Mira raised an eyebrow. It is not uncommon for scientists to observe subjects in their natural environments. Yeah, but when humans do that, it's called being creepy, Jake muttered. Mira thought for a moment. Then perhaps we could participate in the process instead. Jake blinked. You mean, you want to date? Yes. A controlled experiment. You will demonstrate human courtship behavior, and I will experience it firsthand. Jake nearly choked. What? Mira remained completely serious. This would be the most effective method of understanding human relationships. Jake shook his head. No way. Absolutely not. That would be so weird. Mira frowned slightly. Is it because I am not human? No. I mean, well, yeah, kind of. But also, dating isn't something you just do as an experiment. Jake groaned. It's supposed to be real. You can't just fake it for research. Mira studied him carefully. I see. Emotional authenticity is crucial to human relationships. That is an important observation. Jake sighed. Look, I don't know how to explain it, but dating isn't just about learning facts. It's about feelings, and you just said your species doesn't have feelings like humans do. Mira was silent for a moment. Then she asked, can feelings be learned? Jake hesitated. I don't know. Maybe? But it's not something you can just study in a few days. Mira nodded. Then I will extend my research for as long as necessary. Jake sighed. This was getting more complicated by the second. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, I help you. What exactly do you want me to do? Mira's eyes brightened again. Teach me how humans form emotional bonds. Show me how connections develop. Explain human dating rituals, communication methods, and expressions of affection. Jake groaned. I am so not the right person for this. On the contrary, Mira said, your lack of romantic experience makes you an ideal subject. You will not be biased by previous attachments. You can explain the process from a fresh perspective. Jake narrowed his eyes. Wow. Thanks for reminding me how single I am. Mira tilted her head. Was that sarcasm? Yes, Jake muttered. Mira nodded. Fascinating. Another layer of human communication. Jake rubbed his face. Fine, but if we're going to do this, we need to set some rules. No weird alien technology. No sneaking under my bed. And no treating this like some science experiment where you poke me with a stick. Mira nodded. Understood. In return, I request full honesty. If I am to understand human relationships, I must experience real reactions. Jake sighed. Great. So, where do we start? Mira smiled. We begin tomorrow. I will prepare a list of common human dating behaviors for us to explore. Jake groaned. This is going to be the weirdest thing I have ever done. Mira's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Then it will be a successful experiment. Jake shook his head. He had no idea what he had just agreed to. Jake woke up the next morning hoping everything that had happened last night was just a weird dream. But when he walked into his living room and saw Mira sitting on his couch, staring at the TV with intense focus, he realized this was very real. She had a notebook in her hands, flipping through pages filled with strange symbols. Her silver hair shimmered in the morning light, and her glowing blue eyes didn't move away from the screen. Jake rubbed his face. "Please tell me you didn't stay up all night watching TV." Mira turned her head slightly. "I required more data. I reviewed 42 human romantic films." Jake blinked. "You watched 42 romance movies in one night?" "Yes. The patterns are becoming clear. I have prepared a list of common dating behaviors that we must now test." She held up the notebook like it was a sacred document. Jake sighed and sat down. "All right, let's hear it." Mira flipped a page. Number 1. The accidental fall. Jake raised an eyebrow. "What?" Mira explained. "In 63% of films, romantic relationships begin when one individual accidentally falls into the arms of another. This appears to be a crucial step." Jake groaned. "That's just a movie cliché. People don't actually fall into each other's arms in real life." Mira frowned. "So this behavior is not accurate?" "No, it's just something writers use to make a scene dramatic." Mira hummed thoughtfully. "Noted. Then we move to number 2, the love triangle." Jake shook his head. "That's not a requirement for dating. It's just another movie trope." Mira crossed out the point in her notebook. "Understood. Then we proceed to number 3, the dramatic confession in the rain." Jake sighed. "Mira, none of these things happen in real life the way they do in movies." Mira looked disappointed. "Then how do humans initiate relationships?" Jake thought for a moment. "Well, usually, people start by getting to know each other. They talk, spend time together, and see if they have things in common." Mira nodded and wrote something down. "So the first step is interaction." "Excellent. We shall begin immediately." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could finish, Mira suddenly stood up, walked straight to the window, and threw it open. "Attention, humans." She called out to the street below. "I require a conversation partner for romantic research." Jake's eyes widened in horror. "Mira, what are you doing?" Mira turned back, confused. "You said interaction was necessary. I am initiating interaction." Jake rushed over, pulling her away from the window. "That's not how it works. You can't just yell at random people." "Why not?" she asked. "It would increase efficiency." "Because humans don't do things that way." Jake groaned. "We don't just demand relationships like ordering a pizza. There's a natural process." Mira folded her arms. "Then show me the correct method." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine. The normal way is to start small, like meeting someone at a coffee shop or through mutual friends." Mira nodded. "Very well. We shall go to a coffee shop." Jake blinked. "Wait. What? Now?" "Yes, I must observe real-world interactions. Let us proceed." Before Jake could argue, Mira was already heading toward the door. With a heavy sigh, he grabbed his jacket and followed her. A coffee shop disaster. 15 minutes later, Jake and Mira sat in a small coffee shop. Jake sipped his drink, hoping Mira would just sit quietly and observe. She did not. Instead, she studied the room like a scientist examining an alien world. Her glowing blue eyes locked onto a couple sitting a few tables away. They were laughing, holding hands, completely unaware they were being watched. Jake noticed Mira reaching for her notebook. "Mira, no," he whispered. "But I must document this interaction," she whispered back. Jake sighed. "Do not stare at people. It's weird." Mira hesitated, then turned her gaze to him instead. "Then I shall observe you." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, that's not better." Mira leaned closer. "You said humans talk to initiate bonding. We are talking. Does this mean we are now forming a romantic connection?" Jake nearly choked on his coffee. No, this is just a normal conversation. Mira looked disappointed. Then what makes a conversation romantic? Jake rubbed his forehead. It's complicated. It's about emotions, attraction, chemistry. Mira tilted her head. I see. Then I shall test this. Before Jake could stop her, she turned to a random man sitting nearby. Greetings. I require data. Would you like to engage in a romantic interaction? The man blinked. His girlfriend, sitting next to him, did not look happy. Jake jumped in. She's joking. Ha. Just a weird sense of humor. The girlfriend glared, grabbed her boyfriend's arm, and dragged him away. Mira frowned. Why did that not work? Jake groaned. Because you don't just ask strangers to date you. Mira sighed. This process is inefficient. Jake leaned back. Welcome to the real world. A new plan. After the coffee shop disaster, they returned to Jake's apartment. Mira looked frustrated. I believe humans had a structured system for forming relationships, she said, but the process appears chaotic. Jake laughed. Welcome to dating. It's awkward and messy. Mira frowned. Then why do humans continue to seek romantic connections if the process is so inefficient? Jake thought for a moment. Because, when it works, it's worth it. Mira studied him, even with all the failures and confusion. Jake nodded. Yeah, because finding the right person makes all the trouble worth it. Mira was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. I have much to learn. Jake smirked. Well, at least you're starting to understand. Mira nodded. Very well. We shall continue tomorrow. Jake groaned. Great. I can't wait to see what weird idea you come up with next. Mira smiled. Excellent. That is the spirit of scientific discovery. Jake sighed. His life was never going to be normal again. Jake woke up to the sound of Mira rummaging through his kitchen cabinets. He groaned, rubbing his face. Ever since she revealed herself as an alien scientist studying human relationships, his life had turned upside down. Dragging himself out of bed, he walked into the kitchen to find Mira staring at a jar of peanut butter with deep concentration. Jake yawned. What are you doing? Mira turned to him. I am analyzing human breakfast habits. She poked the jar. This substance is labeled butter, but does not contain actual butter. It is a misleading name. Jake sighed. Yeah, welcome to Earth. A lot of things don't make sense. Mira nodded. That is becoming increasingly clear. Now, we must continue our research. Jake grabbed a piece of toast and sat down. Let me guess. You have another ridiculous plan. Mira opened her notebook. Yesterday's experiment revealed that human romance does not follow a strict formula. However, my data suggests one technique that increases success. Flirting. Jake coughed. Flirting? Mira nodded seriously. Flirting is a method used to indicate romantic interest. If I am to understand human relationships, I must learn this skill. Jake groaned. Oh no. Mira ignored him. I have studied various sources, and I have compiled a list of flirting techniques. You will evaluate my performance. Jake rubbed his temples. Mira, flirting isn't just a list of techniques. It's supposed to be natural. Then I shall practice until it appears natural, she declared. Before Jake could protest, Mira suddenly leaned forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and smiled, though it looked more like she was imitating a mannequin. Hello, attractive male, she said in an oddly robotic voice. You have symmetrical facial features. This pleases me. Jake stared. What was that? Mira tilted her head. A compliment. Humans appreciate compliments on their appearance. Jake groaned. Yeah, but not like that. You can't just say someone has a symmetrical face. Mira frowned. Why not? Scientific studies show symmetry is considered attractive. Jake shook his head. It's about how you say it. Flirting is supposed to feel natural, not like a science report. Mira took notes. Understood. I will adjust my approach. Before Jake could react, Mira reached out and playfully smacked his arm. You are terrible, she said with a smirk. Jake blinked. What? Mira nodded. This is called teasing. Flirting often involves playful insults to create attraction. Jake sighed. Yeah, but you have to balance it. If you just say someone is terrible, it sounds like an actual insult. Mira scribbled in her notebook. Moderate teasing. Noted. Then, without warning, she leaned in and stared directly into his eyes. I am now making intense eye contact, she said. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Okay, now it's just weird. But strong eye contact increases attraction. Mira insisted. Not when you announce it like that. Jake groaned. Mira leaned back, looking thoughtful. Human flirting is extremely inefficient. Jake laughed. Tell me about it. Mira sighed. Very well. If flirting requires a natural approach, then you must demonstrate it. Jake nearly dropped his toast. What? No way. You have more experience being human, Mira pointed out. Therefore, you should have superior skills. Jake scratched the back of his head. I mean, I understand flirting, but I don't exactly go around practicing it. Mira raised an eyebrow. Then this is the perfect learning opportunity. Jake sighed. He could already tell she wasn't going to let this go. Fine, I'll try. He took a deep breath, looked at Mira, and gave her his best confident smirk. You know, for an alien, you're actually kinda cute. Mira blinked. Then she pulled out her notebook. Interesting. Flirting often involves compliments with a humorous or suggestive tone. Jake groaned. No, don't write it down. Just feel the moment. Mira frowned. I cannot analyze emotions the way you do. I require data. Jake sighed. All right, let's try this another way. Let's pretend we're in a real-world situation. Imagine we're strangers meeting at a party. Mira nodded. Understood. I will simulate human behavior. Jake cleared his throat and leaned casually against the counter. Hey there, he said smoothly. Haven't seen you around before. What's your name? Mira sat stiffly for a moment, then responded in a monotone voice. I am Mira. I am from a distant planet. I am here to study humans. Jake groaned. No, you don't say that. Mira frowned. Why not? It is the truth. Jake sighed. Because flirting isn't about giving away everything. It's about mystery, fun, and confidence. Mira tapped her chin. So I should withhold information. Not lie, Jake corrected. Just be playful. Like this. He leaned in slightly. Maybe I'm a spy, or maybe I just wanted an excuse to talk to the most interesting person in the room. Mira blinked. That was effective. Jake smirked. See, it's about vibe. Mira considered this. Then I must adjust my approach. She straightened, then looked at Jake with an almost mischievous glint in her glowing blue eyes. Maybe I am an intergalactic traveler, or maybe I simply wish to observe the most peculiar human in this apartment. Jake blinked, surprised. Then he laughed. Okay, not bad. Mira nodded. I am improving. Jake smiled. Yeah. But remember, flirting isn't about acting. It's about making a real connection. Mira looked thoughtful. Then perhaps I must experience real emotions to truly understand it. Jake hesitated. Yeah. I guess so. Mira closed her notebook. Then my research must continue. I will need more interactions to develop authentic emotions. Jake sighed. Yeah. We'll work on it. Mira smiled slightly. Excellent. Then tomorrow, we continue. Jake shook his head. I swear you're gonna be the death of me. Mira tilted her head. Does this mean our flirting lesson was a success? Jake groaned. Sure. Let's call it that. Mira nodded. Then I look forward to further experiments. Jake had a feeling he was in for a very long study. Jake had barely finished his morning coffee when Mira made her next declaration. "I require a date," she said, standing in the middle of his living room with her notebook in hand. Jake nearly choked. "Excuse me?" Mira looked at him seriously. "According to my research, dating is a crucial step in human relationships. I must experience it firsthand to collect accurate data." Jake rubbed his temples. "Mira, dating isn't just an experiment. It's about spending time with someone you like." Mira nodded. "Yes, and you are the only human I have interacted with extensively. Therefore, you shall accompany me on this date." Jake blinked. "Wait, me?" Mira tilted her head. "Is that a problem?" Jake sighed. "It's just, dating is supposed to be romantic. You don't just go out with someone for research." Mira frowned. "But humans often go on dates with individuals they are uncertain about. It is a method of evaluating compatibility." Jake couldn't argue with that. "I mean, yeah, that's true, but—" "Then we shall proceed," Mira interrupted. "I have already selected an ideal dating location." Jake sighed. "Of course you have." Mira held up her notebook. "A restaurant is the most common date setting. I have identified one nearby that matches the required conditions." Jake groaned. "You really don't take no for an answer, do you?" Mira smiled. "That is correct. A not-so-normal dinner date." An hour later, Jake and Mira sat in a cozy restaurant. Soft music played in the background, candles flickered on the tables, and couples chatted around them. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Okay, so normally, dates start with casual conversation. You know, getting to know each other better." Mira nodded and opened her notebook. "Understood. I shall ask an appropriate question." She paused for a second, then looked at him. "What is your genetic compatibility percentage with me?" Jake nearly knocked over his drink. "What?" Mira tapped her pen on the notebook. "I have read that humans consider compatibility important in relationships. Scientifically, genetic factors influence attraction and offspring viability." Jake groaned. "Mira, humans don't talk about offspring viability on a first date." Mira frowned. "Then what do they discuss?" Jake sighed. "Normal stuff. Hobbies, interests, favorite movies." Mira thought for a moment. "Very well. What is your opinion on quantum field theory?" Jake blinked. "That's not normal either." Mira tilted her head. "But I find it interesting." Jake shook his head. "Okay, look, flirting, dating, romance. It's not about research. It's about feeling a connection." Mira was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "I see. Then I shall attempt emotional interaction." Before Jake could react, Mira suddenly leaned forward, her glowing blue eyes locked onto his. "I enjoy your company," she said in a softer voice. "I find your reactions amusing. Your confusion is endearing." Jake froze. For the first time, Mira wasn't talking like a scientist. She was just talking. A slow smile crossed his face. "Well, that's actually kind of sweet." Mira nodded. "Then I am improving." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, a little." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Mira suddenly grabbed a fork and held it up. "I have also read that humans feed each other during dates," she announced. "This strengthens bonding." Jake groaned. "Please don't." Mira picked up a piece of food and held it toward his mouth. "Say ah," she instructed. Jake covered his face. "This is the most embarrassing date of my life." Mira smiled. "Then it is successful." A change in perspective. After dinner, they walked back to Jake's apartment. The night air was cool, and the streets were quiet. Mira walked beside him, her usual confident expression replaced by something more thoughtful. "I have gathered significant data today," she said. Jake chuckled. "Oh yeah? What did you learn?" Mira looked at him. "That human relationships are unpredictable." Jake nodded. "Yeah, pretty much." Mira hesitated before speaking again. Despite my research, I did not anticipate enjoyment. Jake raised an eyebrow. Enjoyment. Mira nodded. I expected this to be purely informational, but I found the experience pleasant. Jake smiled. That's what I was trying to tell you. Relationships aren't just about logic. Sometimes, they just feel right. Mira studied him for a long moment. Perhaps emotions are more complex than I initially believed. Jake smirked. Welcome to being human. Mira gave him a small smile. It is interesting. Jake chuckled. Yeah, it is. As they reached his apartment, Mira turned to him. We shall continue tomorrow. Jake sighed. Mira, dating isn't supposed to be scheduled like a science experiment. Mira tilted her head. And yet, I wish to spend more time with you. Jake paused, surprised by her words. Then he smiled. Yeah, me too. Mira nodded, satisfied. Then the experiment continues. Jake laughed. You know what? Fine. Let's see where this crazy study takes us. Mira smiled softly. Excellent. And with that, the strangest, most unexpected relationship in human history continued. Jake never thought he'd get used to having an alien scientist living in his apartment, but somehow Mira had become a normal part of his daily life. Well, as normal as things could be when the alien in question was constantly studying human romance like a science experiment. This morning, Mira sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, watching him as he made coffee. Her silver hair glowed softly in the sunlight, and her glowing blue eyes focused on him with deep curiosity. Jake, she said suddenly. Yeah, he replied, pouring himself a cup. I have been analyzing my data, she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. And I believe I may be experiencing an error. Jake raised an eyebrow. An error? Mira nodded. I have been documenting human relationships logically, but recently I have encountered unexplained reactions. Jake sat down across from her. Like what? Mira hesitated. For example, when we spent time together yesterday, I felt a sense of satisfaction beyond the purpose of my research. It was pleasant, enjoyable. Jake smirked. Mira, that's not an error. That's just having fun. Mira frowned. But my mission is to study human behavior, not to personally experience emotions. Jake chuckled. Well, hate to break it to you, but feelings don't care about your research. Mira was silent for a moment, then sighed. This is highly inefficient. Jake laughed. Yeah, welcome to being human. A strange reaction. Later that day, Jake and Mira went for a walk in the park. Mira had insisted on observing couples in a natural environment, and Jake had agreed, mostly because he didn't feel like arguing. As they walked, Mira suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked onto a young woman sitting on a bench, talking to a man. The woman laughed at something he said, leaning in slightly. Mira narrowed her eyes. Interesting. Jake followed her gaze. What is? Mira's expression was unreadable. The way she looks at him. The way she laughs. Jake shrugged. That's just flirting. Mira was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a softer voice. Have I ever looked at you like that? Jake was caught off guard by the question. He scratched the back of his head. I don't know. Maybe. Mira looked thoughtful. I see. She turned back to the couple, but something about her expression had changed. Jake frowned. Are you okay? Mira hesitated. I do not know. She was gripping her notebook tightly, her glowing blue eyes flickering with something unfamiliar. For the first time, Jake saw something in Mira that he never expected. Uncertainty. An unfamiliar feeling. That night, back at Jake's apartment, Mira sat on the couch, staring at her notebook without writing anything. Jake watched her from the kitchen. All right, spill it. Something's been bothering you since the park. Mira looked up. Jake, I have studied many emotions. I have observed attraction, jealousy, and attachment in humans. Jake nodded. Yeah. Mira hesitated, but I did not expect to experience them myself. Jake blinked. Wait, jealousy. Mira frowned. The woman in the park, the way she interacted with the man. When I saw them, I felt something unusual, a strange discomfort. Jake's heart skipped a beat. You mean you were jealous? Mira's frown deepened. That is the logical conclusion. However, I do not understand why. Jake took a deep breath. Mira, maybe it's because you're starting to feel something real. Mira's glowing eyes met his. Real. Jake nodded. Yeah, maybe this isn't just research for you anymore. Mira was silent for a long time. Then, softly, she asked, if this is not research, then what is it? Jake swallowed hard. It's us. Mira blinked. Us? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mira, I know you came here to study human relationships, but somewhere along the way, I think you actually became part of one. Mira looked down at her hands. That was not my intention. Jake smiled. Yeah, well, love doesn't care about intentions. Mira tilted her head. Love? Jake felt his heart race. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. All I know is that I like having you around. And I think you like being around me too. Mira was quiet. Then, slowly, she closed her notebook. I believe, she said softly, this experiment has become more complex than I expected. Jake chuckled. Yeah, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she set her notebook aside and simply sat with him in silence. For the first time, she wasn't studying him. She was with him. And for the first time, Jake realized this was no longer just an experiment. This was something real. The night was quiet. The only sound in Jake's apartment was the gentle hum of the city outside. He sat on the couch, staring at Mira, who was still holding her closed notebook. She had spent so many days filling those pages with notes, analyzing every detail of human relationships. But now, for the first time, she wasn't writing anything. She was just there. Jake cleared his throat. So, what happens now? Mira's glowing blue eyes met his. I do not know. That was a surprise. Mira always had a plan, a research method, a strategy. But now, she looked uncertain. Jake gave a small smile. Guess that makes two of us. Mira tilted her head. I have spent my time studying human behavior, but I did not expect to become part of it. Jake nodded. Yeah, emotions have a way of sneaking up on you. Mira hesitated. Then, if this is no longer an experiment, what is my next step? Jake took a deep breath. That's up to you. Mira frowned slightly. Explain. Jake leaned forward. Mira, all this time, you've been looking at relationships like a science project. But relationships aren't about data. They're about choice. Mira was silent for a moment. Choice. Jake nodded. Yeah, you don't need a formula to tell you how you feel. You just know. Mira looked down at her hands. I have studied emotions. I have recorded their patterns, but I never considered feeling them myself. Jake chuckled. Yeah, welcome to being human. Mira looked up. I am not human. Jake smirked. Could have fooled me. Mira blinked. I am still alien. My mission is still to study humanity. Jake shrugged. So, maybe now you're studying in a different way. Mira thought for a moment. Perhaps I no longer wish to simply observe. Jake raised an eyebrow. Oh. Mira took a deep breath, something she had never done before, as if she was trying to understand her own emotions. Then, slowly, she looked at Jake with something different in her expression. Something real. I wish to experience, she said softly. Jake swallowed. Mira, are you saying? Jake's chest tightened. Stay. Mira nodded. If I leave, I will always wonder what this could have become. That is an incomplete experiment. I do not like incomplete experiments. Jake laughed softly. Mira, you don't have to think of this as an experiment anymore. Mira tilted her head. Then what is it? Jake hesitated, then slowly reached out, taking her hand. It's just us. Mira looked at their hands, then at Jake. Us. She didn't pull away. For the first time, she wasn't searching for data. She wasn't analyzing. She was just feeling. A soft smile crossed her lips. I like that. Jake grinned. Yeah, me too. The notebook sat on the table. Forgotten. Because for the first time, Mira didn't need to write anything down. She was living it. And that was better than any research. Epilogue. A new beginning. Days turned into weeks. Mira's research was no longer about collecting data. She stopped treating Jake like a subject and started treating him like a partner. She still had questions, lots of them. But now, she wasn't looking for answers in a notebook. She was finding them in moments. A quiet morning drinking coffee together. A walk through the park where she didn't analyze couples, but simply held Jake's hand. A night spent watching movies where she didn't write notes about human entertainment but just laughed at the funny parts. One day, Jake found her standing by the window, looking up at the stars. Thinking about home, he asked. Mira nodded. Yes, but not in the way I used to. Jake walked over. How do you mean? Mira turned to him. Before, I saw this as a mission, a temporary assignment. But now, she paused, then smiled softly. Now, I see it as something more. Jake smirked. So, what? You're an alien turned human now? Mira chuckled. I am still alien, but perhaps I am also yours. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He smiled. Yeah, I like the sound of that. Mira took his hand. Then let us continue this experiment. Jake laughed. Mira, it's not an experiment anymore. Mira smirked. I know. But I also know humans enjoy long-term studies. Jake chuckled. All right then. Let's make it a lifetime study. Mira's eyes glowed softly. I accept those terms. And with that, an alien who once came to study human romance found something she never expected. A reason to stay. The end.